My family believed every lie she told, so I disappeared for 10 years without a word. I grew up in a house that looked like a brochure. Picture-perfect family in Portland, manicured lawn, polite smiles, and all the proper titles. My dad was a state auditor, the kind of man who wore quiet authority like a second skin. My mother was a school counselor, supposedly a professional at understanding emotions, but at home, she was cold calculation dressed in soft cardigans. And then there was Jessica, my sister, everyone's favorite. The glowing girl next door type who always knew how to angle herself into the spotlight as the eternal victim. I was Blake, the son who learned to stay small. From the outside, we were the kind of family neighbors pointed to as a model. Dad's briefcase always zipped shut at 7 a.m. sharp. Mom baked things for school fundraisers and knew all our teachers by name. Jessica had dimples and a laugh people compared to tinkling bells. And well, I learned early on that I was easiest to love when I was invisible. The thing about my mother is that she never yelled. That would have been too obvious, too loud, too beneath her. She ruled with disappointment, so sharp it cut deeper than any belt could. She controlled the room with a glance, her expectations wrapped around my throat like a leash. When I got an A, she asked why it wasn't an A+. When I got an A+, she pointed out that Jessica had done it a year earlier with less effort. Every interaction was a subtle performance, a calibrated judgment. Her silence was never neutral. It dripped with consequence. I grew up flinching at size. Dad, he disappeared in plain sight. He sat at the dinner table every night, fork in hand, eyes half-glazed, nodding along to Mom's commentary without ever intervening. He never protected me. Not from her sharp words, not from Jessica's emotional whirlpools, not from the constant erosion of self-worth I lived with. He'd occasionally offer a bland, "Listen to your mother." Or worse, "She just wants what's best for you." As if that justified everything. I wanted him to choose me. He never did. His silence was complicity wrapped in business casual. Jessica was a different storm altogether. She cried like it was currency. She monopolized every family conflict with her dramatics. And somehow, no matter what happened, she was always the one who ended up consoled. If she slammed her bedroom door, it was because I pushed her too far. If she failed a class, it was because I didn't help her enough. If she lied, it was because she was struggling. And I was supposed to understand. My job wasn't to speak. My job was to shoulder the guilt, absorb the fallout, and never make a scene. I became the emotional sponge in a family addicted to chaos cloaked in normalcy. What people never realized was how much of me I had to amputate to survive in that house. I wasn't allowed anger. Anger was disrespect. Sadness was dramatic. Even joy was suspicious. Too much of it drew attention, and attention led to dissection. So I dulled myself. I got very good at being quiet, at observing from corners, at flattening my existence so it wouldn't take up too much space. I folded my emotions like laundry, tidy, forgettable, shoved into drawers. By high school, I was the kind of kid teachers described as respectful and well-mannered. I had no real friends. You can't form close relationships when you're constantly rehearsing how to seem fine. I dated once or twice, but I never let anyone get close. I didn't know how. I trained myself out of need. I got used to loneliness like most people get used to background noise. It just became part of the architecture. I left for college with a scholarship and a backpack full of tightly packed trauma no one saw. My mother hugged me like she was shaking hands with a business associate. My dad told me, "Make us proud." Jessica sobbed in the driveway like she was the one being left behind. That image, her tears, his emptiness, my mother's cold smile, stayed with me longer than anything I packed. People talk a lot about healing, about setting boundaries, about learning to reclaim yourself. But no one really prepares you for the dull grief of realizing your family never truly saw you. That they loved the version of you that kept their world intact, not the one that needed care. There's no Hallmark card for that kind of mourning. No guidebook on how to peel off the personality you created just to survive. And yet, here I am. Not fixed, not healed, but free. And maybe that's enough for now. It started before I even had the language to recognize what it was. Jessica always knew how to twist the air in a room until it bent around her needs. If a vase was shattered, if $20 went missing from Mom's purse, if the dog got into something it wasn't supposed to, somehow it was me. Always me. She didn't have to cry loudly or throw tantrums, not at first. All she had to do was point in my direction with that practiced look of wide-eyed innocence and say something like, "Blake did it." And that was enough. My mother wouldn't even blink. No questions, no hesitation, just that sharp inhale through her nose, her eyes already narrowing before I had a chance to speak. And if I ever dared to protest, she'd shut it down with that same line she used like scripture: "You're a boy. You have to take responsibility." At the time, I didn't even know that wasn't normal. I thought that's just what older sisters did. I thought this is what family meant, that one person could wield truth like a weapon and another could be expected to bleed quietly. I don't remember the first lie Jessica told about me, but I remember how it felt. That flash of confusion, like the floor had shifted beneath me. One moment we were just kids playing, and the next, she was crying to Mom, and I was standing there with my hands open and empty, wondering how I'd gone from existing to being guilty in the span of a sentence. There was one time, I must have been around 7, Jessica broke the screen door. She'd slammed it too hard after fighting with a neighborhood kid. I was in the backyard digging holes in the dirt with a plastic spoon, not even near the door. But when it broke, she came outside crying, cheeks flushed, and without missing a beat, she said I'd pushed it open too hard when I came back inside. I barely had time to process the lie before Mom stormed out and grabbed me by the wrist, dragging me inside to talk about consequences. I remember the way her fingers clamped down, not in anger, but in certainty, like she already knew I'd done it because Jessica had said so. There was no hearing my side. There never was. That pattern didn't change. It just evolved. The accusations got sneakier, the stakes a little higher each year, and the consequences dug deeper into my skin. Jessica learned that tears worked best when they arrived suddenly. She'd cry because I looked at her funny, because I used the last of the cereal, because I got praise from a teacher and she didn't. Somehow it always came back to me being the reason she felt hurt, overlooked, or wronged. And Mom would sit her down, stroke her hair, whisper that she was special and sensitive and that boys didn't understand the burden girls carried. Then she'd turn to me and say, "You need to be more careful with your sister's feelings. She's delicate." But no one ever asked what I was. I swallowed it all. I figured maybe this was just the way things were. Jessica had a hard time with emotions, or she needed more love, or I had to be stronger because that's what boys did. That's what Mom said, and Dad never said otherwise. He just sighed and kept his head in the newspaper or the evening news, never stepping in, never questioning the script. Over time, I stopped defending myself. It felt easier. Arguing didn't change anything. It just made me feel smaller. So I learned to nod, to apologize, to clean up the messes I didn't make and absorb the blame like a second skin. What I didn't understand then was that Jessica wasn't just lying. She was writing the narrative of our childhood, and I was the villain in her story. She played the victim so convincingly that even I started to question myself. Maybe I'd been too rough, too thoughtless, too loud. Maybe I really did need to try harder. Maybe if I were just a little better, she wouldn't feel so hurt all the time. I didn't see the manipulation for what it was. I just saw a sister crying and a mother who never looked at me the same once the tears started. Looking back now, I realized that those moments weren't isolated incidents. They were training. Jessica was learning how to control people, and I was learning how to disappear. She honed her skills with every accusation, every well-timed sob, every quiet look that shifted the blame. And I became quieter, more careful, walking on eggshells in my own home, just trying to stay out of her crosshairs. But in a house like that, it didn't matter. She'd find a way to spin the story, and I'd be the one left holding the weight of it. And the worst part? I thought that was love. I thought that was what family did. I thought staying quiet was the price I had to pay to keep the peace, even if it meant losing myself piece by piece. I was 17 when Jessica accused me of stealing money. We'd just moved to a new city, different house, different school, same dysfunction. The place was bigger, newer, with high ceilings and polished floors, but the air inside still carried the same pressure, like everyone was holding their breath just beneath the surface. My dad had taken a job transfer, and we'd landed in one of those neighborhoods with identical mailboxes and neighbors who smiled too much. Everything was supposed to be a fresh start, but it didn't take long before old patterns found their way in like mold under the paint. Jessica came into the kitchen one afternoon with that practiced look of soft devastation, clutching her wallet like it was a relic, her voice trembling just enough to draw concern without tipping into theatrics. "Someone stole from me," she said, eyes flicking toward me with the same casual cruelty I'd come to expect. "I had $60 in here. It's gone." My mother stopped rinsing dishes. Dad muted the television. Time slowed in that thick, heavy way it always did when Jessica decided to stir the pot. She didn't have to say my name. She never had to. Just the implication was enough. I barely had a chance to respond before the interrogation began. "Where were you this morning?" my mother snapped, towel in hand like she was cross-examining a suspect in court. "Did you go into her room?" "Why would I go into her room?" I asked, confused and already weary. I didn't take anything. But it didn't matter. Jessica had pointed the invisible finger, and that was enough to tilt the axis of the house in her favor. My mother's disappointment was immediate, almost rehearsed. "I'm not angry," she said, which was a lie. "I'm just tired, Blake. Tired of this." My father stood in the doorway with his arms crossed, silent as always, watching me like he was waiting for a confession I didn't have. The shame wasn't in what I did. It was in the assumption that I'd done it at all. When I kept denying it, they didn't argue. They just called the police. I stood there, completely still, while my mother gave the officer our address and explained that her daughter's money had gone missing and that her son had a history of being careless with boundaries. It was said in that calm, clinical tone she always used when she wanted to sound reasonable while gutting me clean. Jessica was in the corner sniffling, acting like the betrayal had physically wounded her. I looked at my dad for something, protection, disbelief, anything, but he wouldn't even meet my eyes. The officer arrived 20 minutes later. I wasn't handcuffed, but I might as well have been. He asked the routine questions, asked if I had a wallet, asked to check my pockets, asked me to explain my day. I gave him the truth in clipped, quiet words while Jessica hovered behind my mother like a tragic backdrop. The officer was polite but detached. Professional. He made notes. Asked if there were security cameras. My mother hesitated, then remembered the new house came with a door cam system and an interior hallway feed. My dad had set it up on a whim, probably to keep an eye on package thieves. In that moment, it became the only thing between me and a juvenile record. The footage didn't lie. Jessica had gone into her own room, taken the money out, and tucked it into a book she later slid under her mattress. Clear as day. No one else entered the room. No shadows. No theft. No crime. Just a girl hiding her own cash and crying wolf like it was a second language. When the truth came out, Jessica didn't apologize. She cried harder. Said she must have forgotten. My mother's expression didn't change. She didn't even look relieved. If anything, she looked annoyed that the narrative had been interrupted. Fine, she said, voice tight. It was a mistake. But the next words were the ones that hollowed me out. Still, where there's smoke, there's fire. That sentence clung to me like oil. It was the confirmation I'd feared my whole life. That even with proof, even with facts laid out in 1080p clarity, I was still guilty in their eyes. Not because of anything I'd done, but because Jessica said so, and that was always enough. It didn't matter that the story fell apart. The damage was done. From that day on, something in me snapped quietly. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I just accepted what I'd known for years but hadn't been willing to admit out loud. That trust in my family had never really included me. I wasn't the son they defended. I wasn't the sibling they believed. I was the placeholder for their suspicions, the scapegoat when discomfort needed a name. And no amount of truth was going to change that. Leaving felt less like freedom and more like removing a thorn that had been in my skin so long I forgot it was causing pain. I didn't have a grand plan. Just a dorm bed with a mattress thin as paper, a borrowed mini fridge, and a class schedule that felt like a map to somewhere that might finally belong to me. I took a job waiting tables at a small Italian place on the edge of campus. Long hours, aching feet, low pay, but I didn't care. Every dropped plate, every fake smile to entitled customers, every night closing alone with music echoing in the back kitchen was still better than another silent dinner in that house with my mother watching me like a disappointment she hadn't finished sculpting. My dorm wasn't anything special. Cracked paint, flickering hallway lights, showers that ran either boiling or freezing. But it was mine. No one raised their voice when I forgot to take out the trash. No one blamed me when something went missing. I didn't flinch when someone knocked on the door. For the first time, I could fall asleep without a knot in my stomach. I could breathe without analyzing the air for tension. I'd wake up, make instant coffee, and walk to class with this strange sensation blooming in my chest. Not joy exactly, but absence. The absence of fear, of pressure, of being watched from across the room by people who didn't trust me, didn't know me, didn't care to try. That kind of peace didn't last, though. My mother made sure of that. She didn't call. Of course not. Calls could be recorded, repeated. No, she wrote letters. Every month, like clockwork. Neatly folded pages in thick envelopes with her familiar handwriting that always looked like it belonged to someone kind. It wasn't. The words weren't angry, not on the surface. That would have been too easy to dismiss. Instead, she weaponized concern. Blake, I know you think you're doing what's best, but families need each other. You've always been so sensitive. I just worry you're isolating yourself again. We miss you. Your sister cries about you. Do you even care what this has done to her? Always ending with, love, Mom. The kind of love that tightens like a rope. Sometimes she'd include clippings, an article about a former student of hers who turned their life around, or a church bulletin she thought would speak to my soul. Once, she sent a photo of Jessica holding a puppy. She got him to help with her anxiety. You could reach out, you know. Like I was the one who disappeared without reason. Like I'd just wandered off into selfishness. I tried ignoring the letters. I'd leave them unopened on my desk for days. but eventually I'd read them, and every time I did, it was like being pulled back into a room I'd fought to escape. I'd hear her voice in the back of my mind, calm and clipped, that cold sweetness she used to hide the fact that she didn't want me happy unless it happened on her terms. Jessica found her own ways to invade. She made fake accounts online, pretending to be classmates, mutual friends, even strangers asking about books I'd mentioned in public posts. It always started casual, innocent questions, inside jokes I didn't remember sharing. But the patterns were too familiar, the wording too calculated. Eventually, the accounts would drop the act. "You think running away makes you right?" One message said. "You'll always be the liar." Another, "You're not the victim, Blake. You never were." I tried blocking them, changing my privacy settings, even deleting some accounts altogether. But they always came back. Different names, different faces, same voice. Jessica was relentless in the way only someone addicted to attention can be. She couldn't stand the idea that I was living without her narrative framing my every breath. So she reached through the internet like it was another hallway in our old house, poking her head in just to remind me that I was still hers to define. No one around me knew. My classmates saw someone quiet but put together. Professors liked my essays. My coworkers thought I was polite, a little reserved. No one saw the tension I carried like a second spine. No one knew that after every shift, after every exam, I'd walk back to my room hoping today would be the day the envelope didn't arrive, the day no new anonymous message would crawl out of the inbox. But the worst part wasn't the messages or the letters. It was what they triggered in me, the hesitation, the self-doubt, the instinct to apologize for things I didn't do. Even in my own space, with my own routine, their voices echoed like footsteps down a hallway I hadn't quite escaped. Some nights I'd sit on the floor of my dorm, back against the bed, lights off, just breathing, waiting for the tightness in my chest to pass. I'd remind myself out loud, "You're safe now. This isn't that house. You don't owe them anything." And maybe I didn't, but part of me still felt like I did. Because when someone teaches you that love is conditional, that trust is a performance, and that survival means silence, you don't just unlearn that the moment you walk out the door. It follows you. It rewrites your instincts. And it takes time, so much damn time, to understand that distance doesn't guarantee peace, and freedom isn't the same thing as safety. It had been 6 years since I left, and by then I'd carved out a life far from the quiet, suffocating tension of my childhood home. I wasn't thriving exactly, but I was intact, holding down work, paying rent, managing the kind of peace you learn to build in fragments when you've spent half your life bracing for the floor to fall out. So when the phone rang and I saw my mother's name flash across the screen, my stomach turned cold in that way it always did. I shouldn't have answered. I knew better. But I picked up. Her voice was thin, calculated sadness wrapped in just enough trembling to sound sincere. "Blake, your father's in the hospital." I didn't say anything right away, just sat there staring at the chipped edge of my kitchen counter while she sighed like the weight of the world had been placed on her shoulders. "He collapsed at work. They think it's his heart. You should come back. The family needs you." Something in me knew it didn't add up. We hadn't spoken in years, not since I stopped replying to the letters, not since I blocked the latest wave of fake accounts. But the mention of my dad, of him lying in some sterile hospital bed, maybe dying, cut through all that distance like a hot knife. And I don't know why, after everything, I still wanted to believe I was wanted for more than just cleanup duty. I packed a bag and got on the next bus. 7 hours cramped next to a man who kept falling asleep on my shoulder. I barely blinked. I kept picturing my dad hooked to machines, tubes in his arms, chest barely rising. I thought about all the things we'd never said, all the ways I'd waited for him to choose me, and how maybe, in the end, I still needed him to. When I arrived, the house looked the same, too clean on the outside, like it was trying to convince the world it wasn't falling apart inside. My mother opened the door with a rehearsed gasp and a hug that felt like a snake wrapping around prey. "Thank God you're here," she whispered, ushering me in without meeting my eyes. I set down my bag and asked where he was. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "He's resting. The doctors sent him home." False alarm, thank God. That was when the truth unraveled. There had been no emergency, no collapse, no hospital bed, just a tight chest, some heartburn, and my mother's decision to use it as leverage. I was too stunned to speak. I didn't scream or demand answers. I just stood there, watching her fuss over nothing in the kitchen like we were back in some old rhythm I never agreed to. That night, she showed me to the basement, said it was temporary, just until we figured things out. The space was unfinished, concrete floors, a bare mattress on a creaky metal frame, exposed pipes that hissed all night. No door, no privacy. She gave me a thin blanket and called it generous. Within days, the truth settled in. I hadn't come home to help. I'd come home to serve. Groceries. Utility bills. Rent, she called it. Though I wasn't exactly sure what I was renting, unless cold air and mold counted. She said Jessica was between jobs, needed time to find herself. So I picked up shifts where I could, sent money when I couldn't be there in person, and lived in that basement like some ghost they'd summoned to pay their debts. Jessica, meanwhile, floated through the house like royalty, bragged about skincare routines that cost more than I earned in a week, showed off manicured nails and designer shoes she insisted were gifts from friends, though no one ever saw the friends. She never cooked, never cleaned, never paid for anything. But she always had a story, always had an excuse, and Mom always listened with that same soft look of sorrow like the world had wounded her precious daughter one too many times. I was expected to be grateful, to smile when Jessica borrowed my car and brought it back with an empty tank, to nod when Mom told neighbors how blessed she was to have such a responsible son. No one saw the way I was sinking, the way I barely slept, the way the walls of that basement began to feel tighter by the day, like the house was closing in on me again. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd stay long enough to make sure my dad was really okay, then get out. But weeks passed, then months, and every time I hinted at leaving, my mother would twist it into abandonment. So after everything, you're just going to walk away again, she'd say, like I hadn't been dragged back under false pretenses. Jessica would chime in with a sigh about how some people never change, how it must be nice to just disappear when life gets hard. They made it clear, I was there to fix what they refused to face. Pay the bills, hold the weight, stay silent. And I did, for a while. Because even broken roots can be hard to cut. Because deep down, part of me still thought maybe if I stayed long enough, helped hard enough, sacrificed big enough, they might finally look at me and see someone worth keeping. They didn't. They never would. It was one of those mornings where everything felt just a little off. The house too quiet, the air too still, like it was holding its breath. I'd come upstairs early, hoping to grab coffee and maybe a moment alone before Jessica rolled out of bed like some minor celebrity returning from exile. But the moment I stepped onto the landing, I heard my mother's voice coming from the kitchen, low but unmistakable. She was on the phone, or maybe talking to someone visiting. I couldn't see around the corner yet, just heard the clink of her stirring her mug, that casual rhythm she always had when she was in control of the conversation. I'm just glad he's back, she said, voice soft and satisfied. At least now we have money. My body froze, like every word had pulled a wire inside me taut. She wasn't talking about my safety, my health, my future. She wasn't grateful I was home because she missed me. No, I was a utility, a solution, a line item on her budget plan. I didn't go into the kitchen. I couldn't. I turned around and went back down the stairs slowly, quietly, one hand against the wall because I didn't trust my legs not to give out. The coffee didn't matter. The day didn't matter. Everything tilted sideways after that. Later that afternoon, I got a message from a friend I hadn't heard from in months. We'd lost touch, not intentionally. Life just got loud on both ends. But his message was short, awkward. Hey man, just wanted to check in. Your sister told me you've been struggling. She said you were in a really bad place, that you might need help. I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. What are you talking about? He sent a screenshot, a group message she'd sent out to him and a few other mutual friends. Long, dramatic paragraphs. Jessica explaining how I was going through a deep depression, how I wasn't able to work, how the stress had taken a toll, and any help for Blake during this time would mean the world to us. She used the word us, as if we were a team, as if I wasn't working double shifts, scraping together rent for a basement with pipes that groaned louder than I did, as if I wasn't the one shouldering the bills while she scrolled social media upstairs, sipping overpriced smoothies and posting selfies with captions like self-care is sacred. I felt sick. There it was, laid out in plain text. I wasn't just being used. I was being marketed. She was out there selling a version of me that fit her narrative, pocketing sympathy, maybe more than sympathy, while I was down here counting quarters before grocery runs. And the worst part? I'd given her the space to do it. I hadn't told anyone what was going on. I thought staying quiet was the high road. I thought maybe, just maybe, enduring it would eventually lead to something like closeness. That if I just kept showing up, kept helping, someone would see me. Instead, I was being framed as the broken brother, the lost cause, the charity case. All that time I spent wondering if they really saw me, and now I had my answer. They did. Just not as a son. Not as a person. I was a paycheck with a pulse. A sob story with a bank account. A body they could lean on so long as I didn't ask to be anything more than useful. Something cracked in me that day. Not loud or dramatic, but permanent. A clean break. The kind that doesn't heal with time, only with distance. And I knew then, in a way I hadn't let myself know before, that I hadn't come home. I'd been lured back. Not for love. Not for family, but because I was still just one thing to them, a resource. Nothing more. I left without saying a word. No note. No argument. No dramatic goodbye. One night I came home from a late shift, tossed a bundle of bills onto the kitchen table, walked down into the basement, and packed the only things I needed. 3 changes of clothes, my ID, a prepaid phone, and a pocket knife I'd had since I was 15. I left the rest. Photos, old books, memories I didn't ask for. At dawn, I walked out the back door and didn't look back. Just got in the used truck I'd been quietly fixing up for months, turned the key, and drove until the sky looked different and the air tasted clean. I headed north. Somewhere cold. Somewhere wet. A place with fewer people and more fog, where names didn't matter and questions weren't asked. I rented a rusted trailer near the docks from a man who barely spoke, paid in cash, and started showing up at the marina until someone handed me gloves and said, "Hope you don't get seasick." I didn't. The sea didn't scare me. The silence didn't scare me. Nothing about that life felt like running. It felt like resurfacing. The work was brutal. Long hours. Salt air that cracked your lips open and filled your clothes with the stench of fish and diesel and ocean rot. I woke up before the sun, hauled nets, mended lines, scrubbed blood off the deck with numb fingers, and collapsed at night onto a mattress that smelled like mildew and cold sweat. But I slept. For the first time in years, I slept. Deep, dreamless sleep that didn't end with Jessica's voice in my head or the sound of my mother's guilt laced in sugar. No letters arrived. No calls. No shadows under my door. I picked a new name, just simple and quiet, something that fit easily on a punch card or a clipboard. No one asked for ID. If they did, I said I lost it. People in those parts didn't care where you came from. Most were running from something or trying to forget. I fit right in. The days bled together, gray skies, endless water, gulls circling overhead like ghosts with feathers. I didn't mind. There was peace in the repetition. My body ached, but it wasn't the kind of pain that lingered. It was honest. Earned. It belonged to me. Eventually, I heard through someone on the docks, an old guy who had a CB radio and liked to eavesdrop on local chatter, that a man in Portland had been reported missing. A vague description. A family claiming he was deeply troubled. The kind of phrasing that made it sound like I'd walked into the woods and never came back. My name, my real name, was mentioned once on a community board online, then removed. A week later, someone said they held a vigil. No body. No answers. Just speculation. They thought I was dead. And maybe, in a way, they were right. That version of me, the one who flinched when the floorboards creaked, who begged for love that always came with conditions, who paid for peace he never received. He was gone, buried beneath layers of salt and silence and the miles I'd put between their world and mine. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel relief. I just felt quiet. Finally, 10 years passed without a word. No messages. No sightings. No slips. I stayed off-grid the way people do when they're not hiding from the law, but from the past. My name never turned up in any system that mattered. I used cash. I kept to myself. The people I worked with on the boats knew me as quiet, dependable, maybe a little strange, but no one cared enough to dig deeper. That was the point. I wasn't trying to rebuild anything. I just wanted stillness. Back in Portland, though, they turned the silence into a spectacle. I found out years later, overhearing snippets at the docks, someone's kid scrolling through a feed during a break on shore. There she was, Jessica, my sister, polished and poised, standing in front of a sunset, captioned with soft words and a tragic expression. It's been 5 years since my brother disappeared. If anyone has seen Blake, please reach out. He was struggling but kind. I just want to know he's safe. Thousands of likes. Dozens of comments. People writing prayers, condolences, long paragraphs about mental health and family bonds, and how heartbreaking it must be to live with unanswered questions. It would have been laughable if it didn't make me want to throw up. She posted stories. Old photos of us as kids, cropped and color-corrected, made to look like we'd grown up in the kind of family that knew warmth. In one, I was 6, smiling through a loose front tooth, while she hugged me like she hadn't spent years building a narrative where I was the threat and she was the fragile center. Her captions always read the same. "Miss you, B. Hope you're at peace. You deserved better." It was all PR, carefully curated grief, crafted for strangers to consume and validate. I wasn't a person to them. I was content. I was the missing brother, the misunderstood soul, the tragic backstory they could spin into sympathy. She played the role so well that even some of the people who used to know me started to believe it. That I'd been unstable. That I'd probably done something reckless. That my disappearance was a cry for help that just came too late. And maybe, from the outside, that's what it looked like. But the truth was simpler. They hadn't lost me. They had driven me out. Used me until there was nothing left to take. and then turned my absence into performance art. What people didn't see, what they weren't supposed to see, was the real panic behind the curtain. That beneath the memorial posts and candlelight hashtags, they were spiraling. Because they didn't care where I was for the sake of reunion. They cared because they'd lost track of a resource. Their asset, the one who paid the bills, the one who absorbed the damage, the one they could always count on to say yes, even when it cost him everything. And now that asset had vanished. No forwarding address, no calls, no way to guilt or pressure or manipulate him into showing up again. The silence wasn't killing them in the poetic, sisterly way Jessica wrote about. It was killing their control. They couldn't replace me. Not in the way they'd hoped. Not with someone who worked like I did, who caved like I did, who tolerated it the way I did. So they kept performing loss for the world, while privately scrambling for any trace. A paper trail, a missed digital footprint, a crack in the silence they could exploit. But there was nothing. Because when I left, I didn't just walk away from a family, I buried a system. And that version of me, the quiet one, the one they broke and bent and branded with guilt, he was long gone. I didn't need their version of grief. I didn't need their search parties or their slogans or their social media sainthood. What I needed, what I finally had, was distance. And I wasn't giving that up for anyone. I wasn't looking for anything when I found out. It just happened, the way truth tends to when you're not chasing it anymore. One of the guys on the boat handed me a newspaper, old and soggy around the edges, probably fished out of a diner booth or a truck stop shelf. I don't usually read that stuff. Too much noise, too many names I don't recognize. But something caught my eye. A headline tucked low on the page, something about a real estate dispute, probate court, family inheritance tangled in red tape. The name was familiar. Not just familiar, it was mine. I stared at it for a long time before I even read the rest. It didn't say much, just a short piece about assets frozen in a legal battle, a family that couldn't access property tied to an estranged heir whose whereabouts were unknown. But I knew. I didn't need the full story. The name, the location, the timing, it all lined up. The pieces clicked into place like they'd been waiting for years. I wasn't missing. I was in the way. Later, I got the rest from a guy who used to know a guy back home. One of those small world moments you think only happen in movies, but somehow the conversation landed there. Wait, you knew the family that owned that house on Fremont? The one with the daughter in court? That whole mess with the unpaid taxes. And just like that, the curtain lifted. They'd lost the house. Foreclosure. My mother had tried to take out equity on it after I disappeared, but half the deed had been transferred into my name before I left, something my dad did, probably to shield the property from creditors, or maybe just to keep me tied to them without telling me. Jessica had racked up debt, credit cards, loans, even a failed business she launched with someone else's money. The court case wasn't just financial. There were allegations, accusations, fraud, forgery. My mother, once the poised school counselor who lectured me on respect, was now depressed, withdrawn, dependent on community handouts and dwindling favors from people who used to admire her from across PTA meetings. And still, even now, it wasn't me they wanted. It was the signature, the access, the paperwork. They weren't grieving me. They were hunting me. Because I was the key to something they couldn't reach without me. The property, the inheritance, the money tied up in legal knots they couldn't untangle. And suddenly, all those posts from Jessica, all the soft-spoken stories about her missing brother, all the if anyone sees him cries on social media, they weren't about closure. They were about leverage. She wasn't begging the world to help find her sibling. She was panicking because their lifeline had vanished. It hit me like a wave I'd seen coming, but still hadn't braced for. After everything, after the lies, the blame, the exile, they still hadn't changed. Not really. They didn't want to make amends. They didn't want to reconnect. They wanted to cash in. I was never the son. Not in the way it mattered. I was paperwork. A loophole. An asset misplaced. And now that their house was gone, their names were tied to court dockets and collections and sealed bank accounts. They wanted me back, but not the real me. Not the man who crawled out of that basement and into a life that asked for nothing but peace. They wanted the version they could sign over, process through the system, and extract value from one last time. The truth wasn't surprising, but it was final. They hadn't lost me. They'd just run out of ways to exploit me. And that was the only part they ever truly mourned. I wrote one letter. No return address. No name on the envelope. No apology. No explanation. Just a few lines printed in black ink on plain white paper. Each word cut clean and sharp like the edge of something I was finally willing to let die.